And it was, in fact, Jacob who, according to the traditional account, supported by some scholars, who went down from the land of Canaan to Egypt to escape famine. And there, the children of Israel were enslaved for an extended period, as much as 400 years. It is there that they met up with their new unwitting and unsuspecting and unwilling, at certain points, leader, Moses, who developed over the course of time both the courage and the voice to lead his people out of the condition of slavery to which they had been subjected over hundreds of years in the act of Exodus as they escaped Egypt, commemorated during the Jewish holiday of Passover. So at this point in time in our account, we must say two things. One, we're not certain that we have actual corroborating historical or archaeological evidence for anything that I've mentioned to date. Nothing about Abraham and relatively little about Moses and an Israelite presence in Egypt, or for that matter, the Exodus itself. At the same time, we have very powerful myths that have survived from antiquity into the present. The very idea of monotheism lent to the Israelites a sense of chosenness. Alternatively, we could say that if we were adopting the traditional perspective, God chose the Israelites. But nonetheless, at a certain point in time, the Israelites came to believe that they were the chosen people of God. This led to a significant degree of separation from other polytheistic peoples of the ancient Near East, a sense of exclusivity. And here we have to encounter, we have to consider the views of the great 17th century Dutch Jewish renegade who is pictured before you, Benedictus Baruch Spinoza, who came upon an interesting revelation of his own in the 3rd chapter of the Theological Political Treatise, when he reviewed this very sequence that you have before you of monotheism leading to chosenness, leading to separation or sense of exclusivity, leading to Gentile hostility and resentment towards the Jew. And then Spinoza adds the final piece to this sequence, which is to say that very Gentile hostility validated again the sense of Jewish distinctiveness. In a certain sense, reinforced the Jews' own sense of being unique and apart. That is to say, Gentile anti-Semitism, to use an anachronistic term, because that term, as we'll see, develops much later, becomes a preservative force, becomes a force that fortifies the Jews' sense of distinctiveness. And this is a way in which we can see anti-Semitism as a preservative force. But that's only one half of the story. Secular, enlightened European society, but a world in which Christianity continued to serve as a marker of social identity. And this is an important message to convey, that when we talk about a secular era, when we talk about secularization, we are not talking about the disappearance of religion, we're talking about the transformation of religion. And in fact, that's what occurred in late 18th and early 19th century Western and Central Europe. This persistence of Christianity as a marker of social identity led some Jews to take the step of conversion in order not to become full-believing Christians in the first instance, but really to gain a measure of social validation. And indeed, throughout the 19th century, we know that Jews convert in significant numbers, but a much larger number seek to assimilate in language, in dress norms, in food habits, without converting, but by significantly diluting their Judaism. In part, and in fact in large measure, as a way of integrating into European society, as a way of really achieving a comfortable form of assimilation. They're constantly sent the message that it's not enough, that indeed they remain different, And when we make our way to the 1870s, we have a very concerted decade of discourse and debate over what to do with the Jews. Because thinkers, philosophers, intellectuals, and activists began to ask anew, can the Jews be assimilated into European society? Indeed, it's in this decade that we see the very emergence, for the first time, of the term anti-Semitism. I've used the term at various points throughout the evening, somewhat anachronistically. It actually emerges for the first time in the 1870s from the mouth of the person depicted here, a German journalist by the name of Wilhelm Marr, who created a League of Anti-Semites, as he called it, in 1879. And why, we might ask, if Jews were so intent on assimilating into European society, if they no longer spoke Yiddish, if they no longer held to the dietary regulations of traditional Judaism, if they no longer dressed in ways that set them apart, why? Well, Marr said something quite remarkable. It's not the Jew who is outwardly different from us who concerns us. It is the Jew who can no longer be visibly identified who is the gravest danger, which suggests to us that the structural function of the Jew as scapegoat maintains itself well into the modern era, well into the secular era. But it's interesting just to track this attempt by Jews from the late 18th century to assimilate and realize the grand promise of enlightenment, only to be told, as they cross the threshold of the new edifice of enlightenment, that they could not gain full entry. It was literally crazy-making and produced a lot of neurosis on the part of Jews. And at the same time, that hybrid status of the Jew was crazy-making for Gentiles, who feared that they could no longer identify their traditional enemy, the traditional enemy of Christian Europe.
All right, that topic was called Anti-Semitism as a Preservative Force, the need for the preservation of the belief system by separating yourself, creating these exclusions, and thereby creating the other. I think the term that they use for it is goyim or something like that. I have to brush up on
Goyim
my
sort of, I
Yiddish.
think, refers to chattel, which, refers to sort of like
And then
slave,
the
I
other
think.
thing that needs to be pointed out is Eastern European Jews converted to that religion, just like people in Vladimir's Russia converted to Christianity. And if they wanted to assimilate, fine, but why would you assimilate after converting to a group that says you're super exclusive and that you're chosen, et cetera, all the things that come along with that, right? It's like, you know how like the communists don't like people who really are really into the ideology? They like people like that kind of like know it's bullshit but go along with it anyway. They don't like the true believers. And you got to be some true believers to be from Eastern Europe and then to claim heritage over people who never left Palestine. Those were the Jews in Palestine. The ones that never left, they're the ones that are probably related back to the biblical times because they never left. And the people who never lived there in the first place converted and then got and used human shields, a religious proxy, in order to get their way into that movement plan, that transfer agreement. It seems like they leave an awful lot out of the whole story. And then if you put
There's
any
a
of these
lot.
pieces back, all their Jenga falls apart.
Yeah,
Made by Hasbara.
that's also, a goy, just refers to non-Jew, not chattel. And it was one, there's this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy with this exclusivity in regards to this formation of anti-Semitism then later on. So it's like they're creating the conditions for this thing to emerge that then they can use to differentiate themselves and then castigate their enemies
As a preservative force, and it makes them
yes,
stronger.
exactly. And and then
It's like anti-fragile.
yeah, that's right. And there was another, Jewish refuge. Oh no, sorry. My note card's all filled up, so it's all a mess. Race plus scientism. Oh, so what happened in the 19th century, everyone? Anyone?
Eugenics.
We covered it.
Malthus.
Eugenics.
Spencer.
Race science, huh?
Huxley.
My
Race
goodness.
science. Yes.
Malthus.
Institutionalized racism was created back then.
Exactly. So this idea of this ethnic determinism coinciding with this new sort of definition of anti-Semitism, um, that's those are the conditions for this appeal to the ethnic situation, which obviously falls apart. Gilad Atzmon, The Wondering Who, there is no real genetic determinism. Although today they still use genetic tests in order to determine the possibility of your of ancestry to Judaism, in which case you can gain access to certain state funds and state privileges. So
Dr.
they
Shlomo
still,
Sand wrote Invention of the Jewish People. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these books by Israeli scholars.
right?
Hebrew
Yeah,
University, like
Shlomo Sand too, right? Gilad Atzmon, Shlomo Sand,
even
and let's,
my book on the Rothschilds and early colonization of Palestine in the 1800s. This is Hebrew University. This is
yeah,
not like conspiracy theory stuff.
that's right. That's right. And it should be noted that was brilliant by the Jewish history. What was his name's
Yeah,
Myers last name,
that's the Center for
David
Jewish
Myers.
History, and that is called All Jewish History in Less Than an Hour because he wrote a book of all Jewish history in 100 pages. And
Hmm.
so this is his lecture on his 100 page book, giving the entire history. And as you heard, we dipped in at 17 minutes out of that hour, and he's like, everything you heard, there's no history for this. It's all just basically mythology. And
Right,
then he
that's what I've been
hoped,
saying. It's
right.
mythology for all these. Like when you study really intensely all of these religions, you see a relativity in the belief
And
systems,
that's
and that's why I
okay.
choose. And that's
But
okay.
don't
There
kill
could
people over it.
right, right, but it should say, if anything, maybe we haven't figured it out yet. Maybe we just and that's maybe we should appeal more to logic and philosophy and first principles if you're trying to find causation to the experience we have. But stop appealing to myths and dubious historicities of people that may or may not have existed, Muhammad and Jesus or the Buddha,
And if
Siddhartha
they did
Gautama.
exist, then we got to talk about things they said and
They
did.
actually did do versus the mythology that's been like typologically associated with them, or essentially yeah, taking their story and putting on top of pre-existing pagan stories, from cultures in order to make sure that this deity and these concepts are being instantiated in the local population, which was done with Christ and done with every religion. So I'm so tired of religion being used as the excuse. Uh, all around the world. I think religion is a very beautiful, theology is a very beautiful place in the human condition, but the utilization to create an us them situation has been rife throughout all of human history, and it certainly portends to an element of our nature that we still are wrestling with as human beings, both individually and collectively, that we have not been able to find resolution with. And I like the fact that he talked about secularization. That is true, by the way, about secularization, something that Dr. Leonard Peikoff mentioned. He also mentioned, interesting, Dr. Leonard Peikoff, almost the same history and reason why the Jews became the ones to win out all the mystery cults that existed in the Levant and Mesopotamia at the time, and they won out. Why? They were extremely exclusive. They allowed women. They were monotheistic. The other ones were pagan. They were more loose in order. A lot of them excluded women. So they did, they made a contract in sort of the script of the time, literally like in Babylonian script, an appeal to an abstract, corporeal, incorporeal, depending on terminology, God, instead of the local king or local pagan god or something like that, which is very unique at the time, and utilize that as a justification for anything they wanted to do. Another thing that brought up wasn't just Dr. Leonard Peikoff, sort of the St. Paul to Ayn Rand, if you will, for the philosophy of objectivism, but it was also Douglas Reed. He also, both these men are saying the same thing in very different times, right? Douglas Reed for Lord Northcliffe, right, or something like that. So Douglas Reed mentions this sort of exclusivity all the time in the beginning of the book. This idea of this tribe of Judah, this warlike tribe that seemed to take over, the term utterly destroy your enemies, part of the Talmud, utterly destroy, utterly destroy, utterly destroy, continually repeats itself. This idea that there's a constant us and them, a very sort of warlike moniker associated with early Judaism and Israelite
Harvest
history.
gods are harsh.
Yes.
Harsh environments. You got to have harsh harvest
Whether
gods.
all of that is true or not, I'm seeing a lot of, all I'm saying, I'm seeing a lot of consistency. I'm seeing a lot of parallels between a lot of these different individuals saying a lot of similar things coming from different areas of research. I find that interesting. Maybe we should pay attention to that.
Yeah, maybe we should pay attention to those confluences of information that actually help to make your education. Because in a desert, arid area, harvest god's a big deal. So whether it's
Yes,
like
right.
On or El or Jehovah or any number of the Semitic
Mm-hmm.
harvest gods that are there in Babylonian culture, Egyptian culture, all sorts of cultures over
Akkadian,
there.
Assyrian, Phoenician.
And it helps to read more than
Minoan.
one side on these
That's
things.
Greece.
You know, you've all familiarized yourself with the stories in the Bible. Now go read like the martyrdom of man